And we're live. Woohoo!
We're live. Good morning, Tim. Good morning, Rupal.
Hi.
Well, it's morning for me. It's afternoon for you. So,
And the more observant might have noticed that I'm not in a hostage situation. I'm actually in a travel lodge in Birmingham.
Which might seem like the same thing, depending on the travel lodge.
it's funny. It's been a while. We haven't done this for a while.
Yeah. So, Rupal, getting your name right, good name. Rupal. You are the author of From CIA to CEO, and you help a lot of businesses and people with your experience in working in the CIA. Can you talk a little bit about like your background in terms of the whole CIA thing? Were you a James Bond of the CIA, or did you what kind of area did you work in it, as much as you can tell us?
Yeah. Well, exactly that. So as much as I can say, there were definitely some very sexy James Bond-esque style things that I was able to do while I was at the agency. But the things I can share with you about what some of the other bits that I did are a lot of my job was to get really, really smart on our war zone efforts and strategies, and then to help policymakers and generals and politicians try to execute, sort of our foreign policy goals with the best information possible. So it entailed reading a lot of intelligence, asking a lot of questions, going out into the field, a lot of analysis, and then presenting that information in a way that would be useful to those who needed it. So everybody from the President of the United States, foreign dignitaries, ambassadors, military generals, and then special forces units.
I want to go backwards, Rupal. I want to know what led to you wanting to work for the CIA.
Yeah. So I've always loved to travel. I've always loved learning languages. I've always loved understanding things. So, I come from a family that's, my dad would sort of pepper us with questions at the dinner table to help us think outside of the box, and riddles and that kind of thing. And both of my parents always encouraged us to never take anything as a given, and to always try to understand the root causes or the foundations of things. They're both sort of doctors by training, but engineers by temperament, and that idea that they wanted to get, really, really know the fundamentals and nail the fundamentals, and then build anything else upon that. So that really, I grew up in an environment where questioning and analysis and trying to understand was part of our DNA in many ways. But I didn't really ever consciously realize that until sort of you can start seeing the trends in my career. And I realized that there was a lot that I picked up just from that, that upbringing where we interrogated everything and questioned everything, including my parents, and including some of the things that they, would sort of tell us to do. So that was one thing. And then, as I said, I'm also very lucky that growing up, we traveled a lot. My parents took us overseas quite a lot. Being Indian American, we also had a very strong Indian cultural tradition, and would go back to India. And so I was always, again, subconsciously, before it became conscious, trying to make sense of the way cultures interact and the way different peoples interact. And then it became something I became intellectually and academically interested in. And so I studied political science and international affairs at college, and then later in grad school. And I always thought that would lend itself into a career in the Foreign Service and working for the State Department. And one of the summers in college, I actually interned at the embassy in Muscat, Oman. So I thought, yep, this is it for me, the life of a diplomat. But then when I got the invitation from the CIA to join them, it was sort of a no-brainer. And I thought, well, maybe the State Department can wait.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, is it a case that you don't apply to the CIA, they recruit you? Is that the way it works? Or it's not like a CIA graduate scheme somewhere?
Well, surprisingly, there's not exactly a graduate scheme, but there is, you could go onto the CIA website right now and apply for a job if you wanted to. So it is a bit of a mix. There's an element of recruitment, but then also an element of just go and apply for a job.
So they recruited you though? Was this straight out of university?
Out of grad school.
Grad school. Okay.
Yeah.
Were you surprised, or did you see it coming?
I didn't. I think I was surprised just because I didn't realize that there was a place for someone like me at the agency. So, again, because I had zero experience with the CIA, I just always assumed that what they showed in the movies was all there was, right? Sort of James Bond and guns and flashy cars and all that stuff, or Jason Bourne. And so when I was, sort of approached with the idea of being an analyst, I thought, oh, wait, they have other job roles there. And then once I started there, I thought, wow, you could really make an incredible career doing lots of really, really different things, some of which I didn't even know were specialties or career options within the CIA. So to answer your question, I was surprised just because I didn't think that my skill set was something that they needed.
I think this is a career that so many of us are just fascinated by, probably because of the movies, but did they have you moving around? Did you move around a lot during your career with the CIA?
Yeah, and some of that, again, depending on where in the agency and what your role is, you can move more or less. There are some people who spend their entire careers at headquarters. There are others who spend their entire careers overseas, and mine was a bit of a mix. So I did spend, I would say, about sort of 60% of my time at headquarters, and then the other 40% of it in the field in various countries.
Okay.
So, trying not to reach classified information, but what things surprised you about the CIA when you worked there, as opposed to the popular view of the CIA?
Yeah.
And do you think that they're overworked, or do you think that these things? Let me not lead your question.
Yeah.
What surprised you about the CIA compared to what you thought it was going to be like before you joined it?
So I think. Well, I guess everything was a surprise to some extent because I literally, aside from the movies, I had no preconceived notions. So one of the things which I alluded to earlier was just the breadth of skill sets that they are looking for. Everyone from, analysts to doctors to engineers. I mean, there's a place for everyone at the agency and doing some really incredibly interesting stuff. Even graphic designers have a place there. And so I think that was what, like I said, sort of was one of the biggest surprises, because you could very easily have any skill set and find a place for yourself there. And then once you're there, again, find places to move around if, you want to sort of try something different. So that was absolutely brilliant. The other thing, and it didn't surprise me, but the thing that stayed with me was just how many incredibly massive brains are in that building. I mean, I worked with quite literally some of the smartest people, probably not just that I will have ever met, but probably in the world, who were just real specialists in what they did. And that was really, it was really awing, to be around that kind of capability and that raw brain power.
Now, does our CIA recruit from around the world?
You have to be American to work there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can't just have gone to school in America. They're literally, you have to be an American. Okay.
So you can apply, Krista, if you want to.
Yeah.
That's funny. I'm fascinated that this led you to CEO. Can you tell us the transition? And this is a good transition as we speak, but the transition from CIA to CEO.
Yeah. So I would say sort of maybe about a year or two before I left, I started, I was, like I said, I loved what I was doing. I was having an impact. I was traveling. I was working with really amazing people. And it was really fun, and it was really meaningful. But I would say about a year, maybe 2 years before I actually ended up leaving, I started to just get a little bit itchy feet and think, okay, well, I could very easily make a career for myself here and become a lifer and retire, having worked here for 25, 30 years. But I don't like being comfortable. And I was starting to get comfortable. The job changed every day. So it wasn't comfort from what I was doing, but it was more like I knew I could do it, and I wanted a challenge, and I wanted a different challenge. And so I thought, well, look, now, at the time that I left, I was in my early 30s, and I thought, now's the perfect time, because if I don't do it now, it'll almost be too late. And if I decide to leave and it's not for me, well, I could always come back. So I took the plunge, as I said, in my early 30s. And and wanted to just test myself in a totally different way. And for me, the obvious way of doing that was in the world of business, because I had zero business background. Everything I had done was always, studied was always in the liberal arts. And then I went into the agency. And so I thought, going from the public sector into the private sector would be a really interesting way to see what else the world has to offer. And so the way I did that was I initially, I went and got an MBA. So I have an MBA from London Business School. And I thought that would be a really good way to just get smart on the foundations. Again, going back to what I said earlier, really understanding the fundamentals and the foundations of a business. And of course, all of that education was pretty theoretical, right? There was some hands-on elements to it, but it was really understanding the vocabulary of business and how businesses work and all of that kind of stuff, so that I could then make an informed decision as to what came next. And so I spent those 2 years of business school really just casting a really wide net, exploring everything from startups to finance to consulting to all of that stuff. And I realized relatively quickly that the ultimate test for me, and something that just really spoke to me and called to me, was this idea of being my own boss and of starting my own business. And that was another process in itself of just sort of, I'm an ideas person. I have tons of ideas, and it was going through the ideas and trying to understand, okay, which one of these do I want to run with, and which one are sort of flights of fancy, and it was a bit of an experiment. And anyway, and so by the end of my MBA, I had started a real estate investment and development business.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I guess sort of for me, the most, the sort of drawing the connection to what I'm doing now with consulting for other companies and startups and doing a lot of the leadership training and coaching that I do, is while I was building that business, again, drawing on what I did at the CIA, becoming an expert in something and then using that expertise to help other people, I found myself naturally being drawn into conversations around, helping other founders, helping other leaders. And initially, people would come to me and say, hey, can you check out my business plan, or can you help me, with this financial model, or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And that over time, as I was learning and sharing what I was learning, over time, I just started getting more and more and more requests for help, for ideas, for, being a sounding board. And I thought, I really love this. I really love having the lived experience and having, been in the trenches myself of starting a business, growing a business, hiring people, making decisions under uncertainty and all of that stuff. And then I decided to formalize it, because I thought, this is something that really speaks to me, and I'm really enjoying it. And so when, my first business was at a stage where it didn't need as much of my operational input day to day, I started, like I said, more formally doing the consulting and the leadership work that I'm still doing now.
I have a tiny follow-up question, Tim, because I always have to ask this. My background is in nonprofit work, so I'd like to ask this to bring the nonprofits into it. Do you consult for nonprofit?
Yeah.
Yeah. And does that look different for businesses versus nonprofits?
I think obviously the stakeholder is different, and sometimes the priorities. Well, in the past, the priorities were a little bit different. I think now more and more nonprofits are starting to realize that they need to be run as for-profit businesses. So actually, there's more similarities than not, because everybody is now, because of the financial constraints imposed on us, first by the financial crisis, and then because of COVID, and now the coming recession. I think a lot of businesses, and both for-profit and nonprofit, are, starting to really operate in that sort of that mindset of, how do we sustain our level of service while decreasing any inefficiencies, or maintaining the motivation of our workforce? And so the fundamental questions are almost exactly the same now.
So hopefully it's raining here, and I'm not sure. So hopefully if it's coming in the mic, tell me, I'll mute myself.
No, you're good.
I'm not talking. So we've talked about like the CIA side of things. Obviously, when you moved into the more business side, now your book is about what you brought from the CIA to the business side. But what did you learn extra in terms of the business side when you switched from the CIA? What surprised you? I'm saying like the same question here, but what surprised you about that move from the CIA to private business? What were the extra things that you thought, oh, that's not something we did at the CIA that was actually something better about the private sector? That makes any sense to the question.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, what surprised me most is how little there was different. If I'm being totally honest about it, the only thing that is different is that, sort of the financial side of things. So at the agency, we're funded by the U.S. taxpayer, and by whatever Congress decides is going to be our budget that day. So there's not that same sort of pressure on us to as corporates have on themselves. But to be honest, aside from that, the fundamentals are the same, whether you're operating, in a startup setting or in a more established business, because it's all of these things that, I do talk about in the book, is this sort of, having to make decisions under uncertainty, having to adapt to rapidly changing conditions, having to always keep an eye on, sort of who your consumer is and what they care about. Now, for us, our consumer was first and foremost sort of the American people, who are, holding us accountable to keeping them safe, but also all of the stakeholders that we were supporting with our intelligence. So the president, the cabinet, all of the Congress, all of those people. And yes, of course, they're not paying customers. I mean, in some ways they are paying customers because they're funding our operations, but, keeping what's important to them in mind and making sure that we're not just providing sort of information for information's sake. And so I think there are way more parallels than I can think of any sort of differences or divergences. And that was probably the biggest surprise, is actually all of the skills that I developed and that I was sort of submersed in, that I thought, oh, I'm going to have to find ways to adapt them and tweak them. It's actually almost directly transferable. Yes, of course, the stakes are different. And thankfully, most businesses aren't life or death or, have impacts on national security. But, the fundamentals, again, are pretty much consistent across the board around, leadership and engagement and relevance and changing circumstances.
Yeah.
We
Rupal,
have a comment
go ahead, Tim.
from a certain person who might be Christelle's husband at the end of the month. But
He says, in the UK, many charities are also charitable companies. It's intriguing as there's a drive to also go back to smaller, local, independent companies, social enterprise, and be authentic. Smaller can be easier to adapt. Can you comment on that, Rupal?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, to be honest, it's easier to be agile when there are fewer of you to have to make these adaptations, et cetera. But I think, when it comes to charity and charity work, depending on the scale and the impact that you want to have, sometimes bigger can be better. I don't think there's any sort of one size fits all thing. It's, if you want to have a very local impact, and this isn't, saying one is better or worse, but if you're the impact you want to have is much more immediate, then yes, of course, you need to stay agile and relatively small. But if you want to have global impact, then I think sometimes, there is something to be said for size and scale and having a physical presence and, around the world.
I think the question is always, how are we going to stay our nonprofit, keep moving, keep doing the thing, but make money? Because it's that whole, like you said, we're now moving into the for-profit, seeing that in charities and nonprofit work. And before it was constant fundraising and
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it goes back to, questioning the fundamentals, the boring stuff. Like, this is true for charities, maybe more so than it is for for-profit businesses, where you literally have to know where every penny is coming from and where every penny is going to, and make sure that there is a direct correlation, as much as you can measure, between what is being invested and what the impact is. Because, a lot of companies, and it's not just nonprofits that struggle with this, will throw money at something that they think is going to have a certain impact, but then there's no measurement, there's no follow-up, there's no accountability. And so I think the accountability piece and the keeping track of things piece is really, really key. And also a lot of it is just sort of boring kind of accounting, making sure that you are balancing the books and making sure that your costs aren't exceeding your income and all of that kind of stuff. So I think, like I said, the fundamentals are true regardless of whether you're a for-profit or nonprofit business. But before, where charities had, I won't say luxury, because it's always been difficult in the charitable sector, but there was much more reliability on, the amount of money you were going to get, the amount of funding you were going to get, whether through grants or, families or whatever else it is. And a lot of that has come under a lot more scrutiny. And so there isn't as much of a free flow of money to charities as perhaps there once was, is my understanding. And so given that's the reality, I think, it's got to be just keeping track of where the pennies are going and trying to do your best with measuring the impact, so then you can justify if and when you have to, asking for more, going to donors and saying, look, this is the quantifiable impact of what your dollars or pounds are doing. You can see the direct impact we're having in our communities. This isn't just sort of something you're throwing your money at and it's going out into the wind. Here's what we can point to and show you that is the real tangible impact of what we've done.
We want to ask about your book for sure.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the recession that we're going in. Tim, I want to ask this really quick because I think this is so important for the world. Yeah. We're heading towards a recession. What is one tidbit of advice you have for businesses and nonprofits to make way for the recession, or that will help them to prepare for the recession?
It's exactly what I just said, Christelle. And this is something that we're living by in our own household as well. It's literally watching the pennies, because there is no room for fluff or waste or throwing money at something just because you can. Look, some companies will be more sheltered from this than others, but I think, when the times are good, it's easy to forget about that slow bleed of things. Oh, subscription here, or I don't know, I'm going to make something up. It's totally frivolous, but going out on holidays once a quarter or whatever it is. And it's just starting to interrogate all of those expenses, because, some people might be feeling the pinch more than others. Some companies might be feeling it more than others, but it's really paying attention to where the money's going, where we're spending money and just throwing it, again, into the wind, or at things that we don't necessarily know what the impact is going to be, and where we're investing our money, where we can say, yes, an investment of X dollars is going to lead to this increase or improvement in our services, or increase in our customer satisfaction, or whatever it is. But it is really just being very careful about where the money's going, and then also just taking as much responsibility over making the savings where you can. So as individuals, my husband and I, quite literally just this afternoon, we're talking about, in the wintertime, not turning the thermostat to higher than 18 degrees Celsius, and layering up instead of doing what we used to do, which is, for me, cranking the heat up as high as we possibly could. And so it's little things like that sound, again, maybe frivolous or like they're not going to have an impact, but all of these little things compound over time. And so whether you're doing it at a company, multinational scale, or just doing it as a household, all of us need to start watching the pennies and making sure that we're not being wasteful.
Yeah. So we talked about your book a bit on my other show, do a plug for Book Chat Live. But you came up with, in that interview, a few concepts, which I think are core concepts from your book that are useful for business from what you learned from the CIA. So given we've got like 5 minutes left, what are some of those bullet point things that people can find out more by buying your book? That are lessons that a business or non-profit even can learn from your experience at the CIA?
Yeah, so one of them, and this has sort of been alluded to earlier, is this whole idea of questioning the fundamentals. So both as a leader, as a CEO, but also as someone who might feel constrained by the rules or the way things are done, and to always try to understand, why are we doing this as a business? Why are we pursuing this market? Why are we creating this new product line? And not just taking anything for granted, because I think it's really dangerous to just say, oh, well, the previous leader did this, so I'm just going to continue that and then add to it. Or, in my career, I'm just going to do this because that's the done thing for someone with my background or my education. And I think, that can work for some people for a time, but there will come a critical turning point where, for most of us, again, from both an individual level, but also a organizational level, that just doing things because they're the SOP or the way things have always been done will come under scrutiny, and we'll have to really understand and justify why that was the way things are or the way things were, and then start to find a better way of doing things. And the best example I can think of that everyone can resonate with is this whole thing of working from home. Before, companies would never allow employees to work from home as much as they did, and then COVID forced it on all of us. And just putting aside the mega impact that had on people's mental health, it did prove, at the very least, theoretically, that people can work from home for extended periods of time. And if anything, they were more productive. Companies were, better at some things than they thought that they would be. And so that idea of, FaceTime and having to show up and we need everybody to be in the office, again, came under scrutiny. Nobody before then had ever asked the question why. Everyone was like, oh yeah, we need to be in an office from 8 to 6 or whatever, whatever it was, but why? So for me, that underpins everything, is really question the fundamentals, why things are done the way they're done, why your company, values or culture is what it is. And it doesn't mean everything needs to change or be fixed, or you have to do wholesale overhauls all the time, but at least understand why. And then if the fundamentals are sound and are very logical or sensible or whatever, and they make sense, then fair enough, keep doing business as usual. But if not, then don't feel afraid to change it. And again, like I said, this is true both in your personal sort of way you lead your life and your career, but also from an organizational level and a sort of an executive leadership position, because too many people just go along blindly with, with things the way they were when they don't have to be. And and things could change for the better for the organization, for the better for the people who work there, for people as individuals. So I'd say question the fundamentals. Anytime you find yourself saying, oh, I should be doing this, or we as a company or as an organization should be doing this, why? Why is one of the most powerful questions I learned to ask. Well, as I said, as a child, but then, in my career at the agency. Why? Why do we think this is so? Why do we think this campaign is going to work? Why do we think that, I don't know, this tribe is anti-US or whatever it is? And to make sure you have a good understanding of those whys, so then you can either change what needs changing, or at least proceed and move forward knowing that you've got the fundamentals right.
You wrote a book.
Yes.
To teach. Will you tell us your favorite chapter in that book? And tell us a little bit about it.
That's a really hard one. So this is what the book looks like. I don't know, to be honest. This is going to sound like a non-answer, Christelle, but I actually don't have a favorite chapter. I poured quite literally my everything into this book. And so there are elements of every chapter and little sound bites in every chapter where I'm like, man, that was pretty good. You know what I mean? And so there's no one standout, there's no one standout chapter for me, to be honest. I think the way I wrote it was that each chapter could be a standalone chapter and almost like a reference guide. And so, yeah, as I said, I'm sorry I'm not evading the question, but there's nothing at all in there that's sort of like, oh yeah, no, this is the one that I really love and the others are just so. So I love all of it, to be honest.
Can you tell us maybe 3 of the chapter titles?
Sure. So let's see. So it's divided into 3 parts. Part 1 is thinking bigger. Part 2 is leading better, and part 3 is being bolder. So part 1, so some of the chapters are going deep into your identity, and this is all about really understanding who you are, what makes you tick, your values, all of that stuff that we keep very vague and amorphous, or many of us do, and don't ever actually think concretely about. And that work really then underpins, again, creating this solid foundation, underpins everything that comes in the chapters after that. So the whole first section is about your identity, your mission, your plan for achieving your mission, and then the people you have around you to achieve that. Part 2, which is about leading better. So one of the chapters there is about speaking truth to power. So having difficult conversations, whether it's sort of up the chain or down the chain, or across the board in your personal life, in your professional life, and not running away from those difficult conversations. And then in part 3, about being bolder, there's a lot about developing your own tradecraft. So of course, tradecraft, at the CIA is something that you all learn, that we all learn, but developing your own tradecraft. So not always looking externally for best practices or for ideas or inspiration or role models. And yes, that stuff is important and can be incredibly valuable, but we are all, as individuals, gold mines of information and best practice. And again, so the work in the book is around that we have to do is around, digging within that mine to find, well, what are some of the things that I already have that I could repurpose or use in a different way?
Will you show us the book again so we know what we can go online and purchase it? From CIA to CEO, Rupal Patel. Did I say that right? Okay.
You did. Yeah. And so for those of you who are in the US, it officially comes out in the US in May of next year. So right now you can pre-order it. Okay. I think some sneaky people on Amazon are selling it and shipping it from abroad. So you didn't hear me say this, but technically you can buy it on Amazon right now. But if you wanted to support a local bookstore or Barnes & Noble or bookshop.org, you can pre-order it now and it'll come to you in May of 23.
Now, can you get it in the UK or is it?
Yes. Yeah. So it released in the UK in May of this year, and it's coming out in the States next year. But the audiobook is available immediately and above board, as well as the Kindle version or the ebook version. So it's just the hard copy that the US is going to have to wait a little bit longer for.
Oh, okay. I say, because I put it on the Book Chat live show.
I know. Well, again, everyone can pre-order it, and actually, if folks did want to pre-order it, that would be wonderful and very much appreciated, because then hopefully it means that bookstores will stock more of it. But yeah, you can read reviews and check all of that stuff out from all of those sites. And like I said, it's available for pre-order now. So.
Yeah, I don't know if people know this, but my local bookstore that we frequent and love, we can actually, if they don't have the book, we can request it and they will order pretty much any book. Correct. So it does help. It helps the author and also our local bookstore.
Exactly.
Yeah. As long as it's available to has an ISIN number, they can actually is ISIN IBM?
ISBN.
Not that I work in done stuff in publishing.
No, you don't.
But yeah, they can order it through their systems. But most bookstores don't stock every book ever known to mankind, understandably. So.
Yeah, exactly.
So, obviously, you have got more to your life than the book.
Yeah, just a little bit, yeah.
How can people who see this interview and think, we love this woman, we love everything about her, we want to work with her, how can they work with you? And what sort of things, services do you provide?
Yeah, so I'll start small and go from there. So I do some a few clients of one-to-one work. So that's leaders, sort of usually mid-level, sort of managing directors and higher. So anyone who wants some leadership coaching, I do a handful of one-to-one clients like that every year. And this is just me and you get 100% of my time. And like I said, I limit the number I take just so that it's not too many and I can give my full attention to those I do take on. For companies or organizations that are going through turbulent times, and sadly, that's quite a lot these days. You need a fresh perspective. I do, like I said, a lot of both strategy as well as implementation consulting projects. So organizations from startups to multinational companies, whether it's a team or the whole company that's just needs to shake things up a little bit, needs a different perspective, and not just the theory of, okay, well, this is how you bridge the gap where you want to go and where you are now. But then also what I do is I design a very concrete approach as to how you're going to get there. Because for me, that's the important thing, is marrying the theory and the vision with the actual concrete practical steps as to how you're going to get there. So that's how companies can work with me. And then lastly, I do just one-off speaking events and workshops. So again, any companies that want sort of like a TED style talk or an inspirational chat for an event or a conference, I do a lot of that. And I'm actually flying to Cyprus this weekend to do just that. So yeah, I will travel.
Wonderful. Where can we find you online?
Very easily at my website, which is rupalpatel.com.
You've also got another website. I mean, you're entrepreneur. Was that the
so I'm just melding all of them into one, so that way it doesn't confuse people. So yeah, that's why I'm sending everyone to rupalpatel.com.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So if we want to find her, go to the website. And Tim very wonderfully puts the Scan Me on our YouTube. So you can scan the little barcode there and find
to my website, which has a link to her website. Or you can just type rupalpatel.com in. I think I actually have the other website on there, but I'll go and change it.
That's okay. They both work. They'll all route to the same place.
Yeah.
So you'll find him and you'll find Rupal and know where you can get the book and where you can hire her. So Rupal, this was amazing. And I could talk to you for hours probably and we could learn so much from you. So thank you for your time and for coming on our show. Really, really good information.
Thanks, Tim and Christelle. It was lovely to see you both. And yeah, to everyone in the audience, thanks for being with us.
Yeah. Thanks for everybody for watching. And I'm going to press the button for the outro now. And
thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
This is what God requires.